Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is episode 22 of the KMG show. And I suppose the title is Things Fall Apart. I just came across this tweet from Nathan Kofness, retweeted by David Pinson. The coronavirus situation has made the contrast between useful people and the morality police extra vivid. Scientists developing a vaccine versus pundits telling us what words are racist. As a society, maybe we will rethink the power we give to the latter group. And I'm going to get back to that in a little while. So the Dow took another kicking today and is definitely below 20,000. And let's see, how are the futures looking for tomorrow? Ooh, well, they went from minus 82 to plus 104 just as I was watching. So one could say that the markets are volatile. According to CNBC, Senate passes coronavirus relief plan to expand paid leave, sends it off to Trump. In a 90-8 vote, two senators, Cory Gardner of Colorado and Rick Scott of Florida, did not vote while in self-quarantine. Some GOP lawmakers opposed the bill, arguing it could harm small businesses. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Wednesday that he would vote for the plan, despite what he called real shortcomings. With the urgent need to take action, I do not believe we should let perfection be the enemy of something that will help even a subset of voters. Yes, things have definitely fallen apart when you get to the point where all of our leaders are saying, do something, anything. Doesn't matter what the long-term consequences could be. It's just necessary to do something. Dozens of other Republican lawmakers voted against the original bill, which had President Donald Trump's backing and received overwhelming support from House Democrats. Congress and the White House aim to pass another, more sprawling stimulus package to try to stop economic disaster. Who initiated this economic disaster, by the way? Perhaps there will be a Truth and Reconciliation Committee after this all plays out. New York Stock Exchange to temporarily close floor, move the electronic trading after positive coronavirus tests. So, yes, 80% of all trades now are apparently from bots. So maybe in the future there won't be anyone on the floor. It'll just be computers, algorithms talking to each other. I found this an interesting story, also from CNBC. How to support small businesses crushed by coronavirus with a gift certificate. Online small business lender Kabbage, that's with a K, has launched a platform that allows consumers to support local small businesses during the coronavirus crisis. Businesses can sell gift certificates ranging in value from $15 and $500, which consumers can redeem at any time. The online lending startup had a staff of 100 who built the platform in 3 days while working with a few other fintech startups, Lendio, Finix, and Fundera. And global cases, more than 212,000 global deaths, at least 8,727 U.S. cases, at least 7,324 U.S. deaths, at least 115. Now, I've been talking about when are the bodies going to start piling up like cordwood. Well, we've got 115. I'm going to make a prediction here, okay? When this is finally over, say in a month or so, and the economy is completely wrecked, and no one knows how it is going to be brought back, the elite is going to tell us that we won. That is to say, our wise advice brought us to this victory, and you should never, ever doubt us again. We have only your best interests in heart. We wouldn't instill panic in people in the whole world needlessly, would we? I was at my local Save on Foods this morning, and I noticed they have finally put up a sign restricting shoppers to 2 items. maximum of any paper products. Well, let's look what's going on in my province of British Columbia. It has declared a state of emergency in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth announced the step on Wednesday as part of the province's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. I want to assure our government is doing everything possible to address this crisis. These are extraordinary powers that have been brought to bear in extraordinary times. The declaration of a provincial state of emergency gives the government sweeping powers, such as acquiring or using any land or property considered necessary to address the pandemic. The province also now has the power to control or prohibit travel to or from any area of BC. That capacity was used during the wildlife seasons in 2017 and 2018 to ensure British Columbians did not return to areas under mandatory evacuation order. The state of emergency also allows the province to procure fixed prices for or ration food, clothing, fuel, equipment, medical supplies, or other essential supplies, and the use of any property, services, resources, or equipment. So that's it. It is the big takeover. I see, in terms of rationing, fixing prices, this is very bad news for those people who've been hoarding masks and hand sanitizer. Declaring a state of emergency is an important measure to support our provincial health officer and minister of health in swift and powerful response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are working with partners across government and industry to coordinate emergency response efforts, and we won't hesitate to use the tools available to us to keep people safe. Farnworth declared a ban on the reselling of essential goods and detailed the new ability to restrict people from hoarding food or alcohol if necessary. I'm reminded of that silly movie, Magnolia, a big hit with the critics it was, as I recall, where there's actually a plague of frogs in it. And the next morning in Los Angeles, everyone is acting as, well, of course, plague of frogs. That sort of thing happens all the time. When I saw that scene, I thought if there were a real plague of frogs in Los Angeles, people would be going to liquor stores with their bank cards and saying, "This is all my money. How much whiskey will that buy?" So, okay, so we get to the end of the story. Canada, which is a country of 37 million, has 614 cases of the Wu flu, 9 deaths, and 9 recovered. So they're not exactly stacking up bodies like cordwood in British Columbia. I was looking for the number of cases on my island, Vancouver Island. As far as I can tell, it is 12. 12 cases. And there is absolute panic here. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, we haven't heard much about his wife lately, the patient zero of the outbreak in the entertainment, the celebrity community. Canadian dollar dips below 70 cents US. The TXX, that's the Toronto Stock Exchange, loses another 8% as the Canadian oil price falls to the lowest level on record. Western Canadian Select was changing hands at one point as low as $7.63 US per barrel, down $4.60 from Tuesday's level. The US benchmark, known as West Texas Intermediate, also fell to below $22 a barrel, a level it has not hit since 2003. Well, there is no way that any producer can make money at those prices. In fact, to keep producing would be to lose money, certainly in the short term. It would appear that Alberta is going down the drain, and it is likely to take the rest of Canada with it. Okay, so Vancouver Island news, 12 cases of COVID-19 on Vancouver Island. Just to confirm that, 12, that's 5, and 2. Does it sound like a pandemic to you? I suspect that they're just going to stop reporting numbers anytime now because it's going to be rather embarrassing. Here's a slightly amusing story. Mounties clear blockade targeting tourists heading to Western Vancouver Island. I mentioned yesterday that Vancouver Island is the 8th largest island in the world, but much of it is uninhabited. It's simply rain forest. There, the let's say the westernmost part of Canada is a small town called Tofino. There's another little town called Ucluelet next to it. It is a long slog to get there. You have to drive all the way across the island. And after you get to Port Alberni, from that point westward, essentially there's no civilization at all. There's just a highway, which no doubt at stupendous cost was cut through the mountains to the coast. Tofino is, I was there 10 years ago. I thought it would be exotic. It was a bit of a disappointment because it turns out that there's hardly anyone in the town itself. The people who visit are all at the resorts, which are somewhat out of town. I went there with the co-host of my old podcast, Kevin Steele, and I had enticed him with visions of nude hippie women worshiping the full moon, but it was very prosaic, not anything like that at all. But in the event, Mounties on Vancouver Island have cleared a highway blockade that residents had erected in an effort to prevent the novel coronavirus from reaching the island's western communities of Tofino and Ucluelet. It rains about 300 inches a year there, and the average high temperature in July is, I believe, 69 degrees. Not very hospitable. The RCMP say 5 people were obstructing the westward flow of traffic on Highway 4 on Tuesday morning near Sutton Pass, west of Port Alberni. The residents told CTV News that they were trying to turn away tourists, especially those from the United States, but allowing area residents to pass through. After discussions with officers, the situation was quickly resolved and the traffic flow was again allowed to proceed normally, the RCMP said. No westbound vehicles were denied travel. However, several vehicles decided themselves to turn around. Many BC residents have raised concerns that the province's border with Washington state remains open amid the COVID-19 outbreak. Washington's death toll from the virus reached 50 on Tuesday. Yes, so the Premier of British Columbia expressed his ongoing frustration with the situation and said he spoke with Washington Governor Jay Inslee about the issue of border crossers. He understands that his message to Washingtonians is the same: stay home. If people are coming to Butchart Gardens, it's best to come in August, not to come in April. I have been to Butchart Gardens, and if you go in August, there are so many Oriental tourists there that there's no room to swing a cat. My advice about visiting Butchart Gardens would be to avoid the tourist season. So I suspect what happened on that lonely highway pass, that a bunch of people from Tofino and Ucluelet told people, yeah, don't bother coming here, and we know who you are because you're all driving cars, and we will recognize the foreign license plates. And I think they made it clear to them that people with foreign license plates, especially those from the state of Washington, are not welcome in Tofino and Ucluelet at this time. A rare word of panic-free response from my old friend and colleague Lauren Gunter, writing for the Sun newspaper chain. He talks about a story from his great-grandfather. Back in 1919, many of the public buildings in the small town of Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, were heated with central steam, and my great-grandfather ran the municipal boiler. Even though he contracted the Spanish flu during the worldwide pandemic, he went to work with a temperature of 104 so he could keep City Hall, the school, and tiny hospital warm. I raise this now to show how things have changed since the great influenza of that time and encourage people, including the media, to take a less panicked approach. First, if my family's tale is true, there was obviously no social distancing back then. Great-grandpa John showed up to work while he was clearly contagious, possibly infecting coworkers and citizens of Maple Creek. On top of the life as usual approach to working, school, sporting events, concerts, and other public interactions that clearly spread the disease farther and faster, hygiene standards at the time were far lower than they are now. Who washed their hands back then? Maybe doctors, but possibly not all nurses, much less cooks, teachers, moms, druggists, and neighbors. When the Spanish flu reared its head again in 2009, starting in Mexico, I interviewed an infectious disease specialist who was quite calm about the whole thing. That outbreak wasn't likely to repeat the earlier death toll. She explained hygiene, even in impoverished Mexico in 2009, was better than it had been in Canada 90 years earlier. Consider just how devastating the 1918-19 outbreak was. It killed 55,000 Canadians out of a population at that time of just over 8 million. The First World War, which had just concluded, had taken the lives of about 60,000 Canadians. So far, COVID-19 has killed 8 out of more than 37 million of us. And that, 8. We'll go with 8. For a death toll similar to 1918-19, it would have to kill more than 250,000 people. Lauren concludes that he's not against taking precautions and that he and his wife are in self-isolation after a trip to the United States. What about Italy? Italy is the country that is panic station central. What does he have to say about that? And why has a developed country had such a bad outbreak? First of all, even though Italy has had over 2,000 COVID-19 deaths so far, remember that this winter, that country has had over 16,000 deaths from the seasonal flu. Italy has the second oldest population in the world after Japan. Almost a quarter of Italians are over 60, and COVID-19 kills mostly people over 70. Yeah. So you've heard my prediction, and you can take me to account for it when we see how this is going to turn out. Let's look at the chat. Buying the dip when I hear a lot of talk about financialization and about companies being hedge funds, not really being in the product business. If this is true, which it appears to be, and that we all decide that this is a bad thing and unsustainable, it could be quite a while before it's time to buy the dip. Chad Chadson, our moderator, says flight tickets are really cheap right now, Jonathan. Maybe buy one and hope for the best. Josh Randall says SJWs are the primary casualty of this awful virus. No one gives a hoot about racism right now. Glib Medley says in 1919, Purell was a virgin spitting into your hands. Our Finnish friend, Jaakko Rapala, says, by the way, according to our media, the EU has identified the culprit behind the global toilet paper run. Turns out that it's all a coordinated campaign by Russia and its right-wing populist pundits. Yeah, well, I can see the media telling this now to us any day now. I saw a link from the Onion AV Club to a publication called The Root, which I guess is under the same umbrella, corporate umbrella. And The Root features Black news, opinions, politics, and culture. And the story is called Donald Trump's Old Ebola Tweets Reveal His Incompetence on Coronavirus, because of course they do. And Trump's old tweets prove he's a hypocritical idiot. That's it. That's the lead. All I can think of is an old joke about a young black airplane pilot flying his first commercial flight out of Mississippi, or maybe it was Alabama or America. I'm not going to repeat the joke, but curious, there's the use of the N-word written in full without an A, with no dashes or asterisks. So I guess it's strangely enough, it's acceptable for The Root to use this word, which is the worst word in the world, and apparently causes grown men and women to scream in anguish or to break down in agony. But there it is. There it is. Perhaps these days are coming to an end. Roberto Di Mattei from Rome writes, "Is Timur at the gates? The most terrible figure of the calamitous 14th century was perhaps Timur, or Tamerlane, as Christopher Marlowe and everyone else called him until recently. Tamerlane, Timur the Lame. A ferocious and implacable conqueror called the terror of the world. He devastated Asia from Syria and Turkey, even reaching the borders of China from Moscow to Delhi. He came from a Turkish Mongolian tribe in Uzbekistan and proclaimed himself heir and continuer of Genghis Khan." Well, I see that we're supposed to say Chinggis Khan, or that's how it's spelled now. He is buried at Samarkand, the capital of his empire, on the Silk Road, the ancient commercial route connecting China to the Mediterranean. The historian Paolo Giovo recounts that Timur, in the first days after laying siege to a city, would display a white flag as a sign of pardon if everyone would surrender voluntarily. Otherwise, in the ensuing days, his army would have waved red flags as a sign of death, not for all the city's inhabitants, but for the commanders and soldiers. Then, if the city was still obstinate in its refusal to surrender, Timur gave orders to display the black flag as a sign of complete extermination, with no distinction between the guilty and the innocent. Then he would burn down the entire city. Well, as far as I understand it, those were the rules for sieges in the Middle Ages. The coronavirus epidemic, which has been unleashed on the world in just a few weeks, is reminiscent of Timur's white flag. It appears to be the first warning of a terrible punishment looming over mankind, but which might still be thwarted. Experts are studying numbers and are making the most varied hypotheses. The epidemical curve may drop or increases. After the summer, the virus will appear in a more mitigated form, according to some, or in a more violent form, as happened with the Spanish flu, according to others. Nobody can predict what's going to happen, but already the resulting scenario is being described. The world's economy will collapse, while Massimo Giannini writes in La Repubblica that the Europe of the Enlightenment and of the founding fathers, just, free, and solidary, is defeated by an invisible and elusive armed enemy. "We are at war," Emmanuel Macron repeated exactly 6 times, rallying against an invisible and elusive enemy. The debacle of the world's economy is acknowledged by concern by all its observers. According to Federico Fubino, the deep market slumps are saying that COVID-19 is bringing global recession along with it. While Rampini in La Repubblica of the same day wrote, "The most powerful bank in the world is impotent. The desperate moves of the Federal Reserve in order to contain the panic in the markets have come to nothing. The global economy is crumbling. A violent recession is coming." Are we on the eve of an economic crack? And if, in some European country, the collapse of the health system should be interconnected with the collapse of the Eurozone, what would the consequences for the European cities be? The scenario for the upcoming months is disquieting. It seems the hour of those fatal moments described by Stefan Zweig is tolling. Quote, "Hours of dramatic potential fraught with doom, when an immeasurable quantity of events are concentrated in a very short space of time, like the electricity in the entire atmosphere on the tip of a lightning rod." He concludes, "God is patient and always wins first before inflicting his final chastisement. The coronavirus seems to be a warning from divine providence to render humanity aware of its errors. It is the hour of repentance for the sins of the world, because by sinning collectively, we have deserved public chastisements like epidemics, famines, and wars, which might well follow one another after the other in rapid succession. God is infinitely merciful, but his mercy presupposes the awareness of the sin and asking forgiveness for it. Other painful warnings will follow, then Timur's black flag will be hoisted." So the Vatican seems to have hoisted the black flag. And this is worldwide. My diocese of Victoria has canceled Mass. Yes. The spread of COVID-19, writes our bishop in our province and around the world, is a matter of deep concern for everyone in our community. Our primary concern must and always be to care for the spiritual, physical, and mental health and well-being of our fellow parishioners and citizens. To ensure this, we rely upon our expert medical professionals to provide us with accurate, up-to-date information to guide and protect all of us with the directives they deliver. I have full confidence in the direction given to our province by BC Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry. Always defer to the experts. So for the duration of this period, I grant to all the Catholic faithful dispensation from their Sunday obligation. I know that the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist is at the very heart of our Catholic life, and the inability to gather for this worship is a cause of great suffering. Let us accept this as our duty at this time. So, are they going to cancel? Is the Catholic Church going to cancel Easter? Easter's been celebrated for almost 2,000 years, and it appears that they're going to cancel it. Well, there's certain times in history when people's motivations become so obvious that they can no longer be ignored. Dr. Bruce Charlton writes about the death of Western Christian churches. On March the 3rd, I predicted they would be using their new powers to prevent Christians gathering. As usual, I underestimated the severity of the situation. In fact, they didn't need to use their powers. Instead, all the major Western Christian church hierarchies have dutifully lined up to close their doors to congregations, cancel sacraments, advise against church members meeting at all anywhere, and in general zealously reinforce the fear-driven, materialistic, safety-first, secular attitude of politicians, mass media, and officialdom. All this at exactly the time when a spiritual perspective is needed more than for many decades. At just this time, the Western Christian churches have stepped back and joined the chorus supporting the totalitarian makeover by an anti-Christian leftist global establishment as a thing both necessary and good. So far as I am concerned, unless there is a fairly swift repentance and reversal, this is the end of the line for Western Christian churches, and he has put Christian in quotation marks. Up to now, despite the prevalence of increasingly corrupt leadership, there was some value in some churches for some people. Now I see the church institutions as merely fair weather friends to serious Christians. When, as now, the chips are down and Christianity is threatened more than for many decades or centuries, they have declared themselves absent. The church leaders have washed their hands of their membership. Things have come to a point. Everyone is compelled to declare sides, and the churches decisively have chosen the side against God. Like the worldwide totalitarian coup, all this has happened much quicker, more easily, and with less fuss than I could have believed possible. The churches, like everybody else, remain sleepwalkers, bumbling around with their eyes shut against the obvious, wittering about how frightened they are, how concerned for the poor victims, and always urging ever more fake birdemic precautions, more surveillance and more centralized control of more things by the godless hedonic nihilists who run the world, urging more fear and deeper despair. Meanwhile, presiding over the actual death of institutional Christianity in the West. Real Christians remain, and nothing truly stops us from continuing to live in faith, hope, and loving charity, but real Christians are now officially on our own. Like it or like it not. This will be a sudden and harsh realization and adjustment for the many who equated good churchmanship with being an observant and obedient member of a true denomination. I feel genuinely sorry for you, but that choice has now been unilaterally closed against you. Your correct choice should be an easy one to make, albeit difficult to live. Your best friend in faith is God as our loving Father who will never under any circumstances leave us without everything we need for salvation and all we need to learn from the experiences of mortal life. Every single one of us has, here and now and always, whatever we need to follow Jesus through death to heavenly life eternal. And we need only recognize it and choose to accept it. Now, this may seem hyperbolic, but as I report, it would appear that the Catholic Church is going to cancel Easter. And, there are 7 sacraments in the church, but, apparently the Eucharist, you can get by without it. Not a problem. We have bigger concerns. Dr. Bonnie Henry has spoken, a voice far more powerful than God's, and who can be against the good Dr. Henry? So, Brandon Smith, KMG, looks about 1 drink ahead of me. No, that was yesterday. I hear head tax virus offered up in jest. Okay. The state godhead apparatus isn't tolerating any traditional imposters. Jaco Rapila says, I saw someone suggest calling it the open borders virus. I think that would actually be better than the China virus. Jonathan Paul says, Genghis Khan with a J. I have seen it with a C, unless that was a different Khan. Jonathan Paul says, Timur is Turkic for iron. In Timur the Lame's case, Chagatai. That's interesting. That Pakistani fellow at Silicon Valley, his name was Chugtay. Are they perhaps related at some point in history? So the media is not going to fail us. I'm looking at a clip here from C-SPAN with a very energized young woman is speaking at a press conference or asking a question. President Trump asked again why he uses the phrase China virus. It comes from China, he responded. I want to be accurate. Boy, they are triggered, and but I don't know how much response they're going to get from this. I think perhaps it will not be the response that they are looking forward to. James Fulford has an excellent piece on this matter in VDare. The Chinese say of themselves that they'll eat anything with wings except an airplane and anything with 4 legs except a table. Brenda Walker quoted that from Food Around the World in 2010. And our John Derbyshire, who has lived in China, quoted the same thing in his 1996 novel, Seeing Calvin Coolidge in a Dream, in which the Chinese narrator's Chinese wife recycles an old Chinese joke. The Cantonese will eat anything with 4 legs except a table and anything that flies except a plane. It is not very funny in English, but people laughed politely. Well, we have heard a version of this from Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. The novel coronavirus, aka Corona, Wuhan virus, or Kung flu, came into being apparently via the unsanitary Chinese habit of eating live bats, etc., in the wet markets of Wuhan. This is not a racial characteristic, but a cultural one. People outside China don't do it much, but the whole world is suffering from it. And then he quotes from a column by David Cole from Tacky Mag. I'm not going to repeat the title because I do not want to be suspended or banned. I will read this much. There's a quote I'm sure you've heard, and it's usually attributed to Einstein, although he was far from the first to say it, and even he said it different ways at different times. I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought. I know only this, World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Well, here's a quote from only one author, me. I know not the source of the next extinction level pandemic. I know only this. White people will not be allowed to discuss it. Cole gave us an example, an anti-racist polemic from James Palmer at Foreign Affairs magazine. Don't blame Batsuit for the Wuhan virus. Racist memes target Chinese eating habits, but the real causes of the coronavirus are more mundane. Palmer engaged in what Steve Saylor calls antiquarian racism research, quoted a New York Daily Tribune article from 1854, and I'm not going to say what is there, but you can imagine. Of course, the Chinatowns of the past, Fulford continues, were insanitary by 19th century standards, but guess what? The Chinatowns of today are often unsanitary by 20th and 21st century standards. See this video from Las Vegas, which is one of many you get when you Google Chinatown and insanitary. There is a lot of suspicion on the right at the moment that Wuhan virus is a bioweapon that was cooked up in a lab, but that kind of talk plays right into the hands of the Chinese as it obscures the fact that Wuhan virus was totally predictable and thus avoidable. For much of the past century, Asia has been the cradle of influenza, including 2 of the 3 major human flu pandemics. The Associated Press reported 16 years ago. Is the person who wrote this story going to be identified and then canceled? 80% of the new human flu strains the last few decades appeared in China. The scientists interviewed by the Associated Press agreed on one very important central point. China is a flu breeding ground because of its customs regarding animal consumption and storage. Claiming Wuhan virus escaped from a lab lets the Chinese off the hook. They've had warning after warning that their customs and cuisine could kill us all. 3 years ago, Smithsonian Magazine, which is not to my knowledge a right-wing publication, ran an article that asked, is China ground zero for a future pandemic? And the answer was yes. The author of that is Melinda Liu, which is a Chinese name, Chinese surname at any rate. Smithsonian concluded that China is the likely source of the next major global pandemic. And again, the scientists were unanimous as to why. Specifically, the wet markets. After SARS happened in 2003, a recurrence of China-borne disease can be described as predictable and predicted, a phrase we've used repeatedly. Cole's headline, which I'm not going to read, refers to the fact that America's obsession with not being racist can kill in so many ways. It's this obsession that I was talking about when I wrote Civil Rights Law Doesn't Care If You Die in 2008, about the many ways that anti-discrimination laws make people unsafe. In a crisis this big, well, it's a case of live not by lies. To quote Solzhenitsyn, coronavirus is a real crisis, not on the scale of the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 to 19, but pretty big. Well, we'll see about that. The reason that crisis was called, and is still called, the Spanish flu, it started in World War I, and all the Western countries engaged on both sides had censorship designed to keep up civilian morale and prevent the enemy from discovering a weakness. Spain, which was not at war, didn't have that kind of censorship, so when people started dying, they printed it in their papers. We don't have that kind of censorship now, but we do have anti-racism, and that's what all the fuss about calling it the China virus or Wuhan virus is about. For example, here's a tweet from a Chinese woman called Weijia Chang or Chang. This morning, a White House official referred to coronavirus as the Kung flu to my face. Makes me wonder what they're calling it behind my back. Her bio describes her as a CBS News White House correspondent and a Chinese-born West Virginian. She's obviously putting her Chinese birth and ethnicity well ahead of any loyalty she may have had to the United States. I'm not saying that any white male CBS correspondent would be in any way loyal to the US, but this is a different kind of thing. And then there's a tweet from Bill Kristol. I assume, by the way, that if this exchange with a White House official happened at all, it happened like this. Chang, why is this being called the China virus? White House official, because it comes from fucking China. Tell you what, if you don't like that, we can call it Kung flu. That nickname goes back to SARS and other Asian flus and has been in the Urban Dictionary since at least 2005. In his 1995 book, Alien Nation, Common Sense About America's Immigration Disaster, VDare.com editor Peter Brimelow uninfluentially wrote that, because the term racist is now so debased, I usually shrug such smears off by pointing to its new definition, anyone who is winning an argument with a liberal, or too often a libertarian. And on the immigration issue, even some confused conservatives. Now, apparently a racist is anyone who's dying of the China virus, but is not, as David Cole pointed out over a month ago, allowed to discuss it if he's white. It may be that this crisis is big enough to require the abandonment of the concept of racism entirely, though I doubt it. Too many people have too much invested in it. However, this is not really about race. It is about culture. China has a huge propaganda operation and a lot more friends in the Western media than Putin ever had. And then there's some advice here, which I'm not going to repeat. You can read the full article at vdare.com, and if you do read it, then you'll understand why there's some things that I am not going to report. But Jared Taylor, there's a linked video from him called Xenophobia Can Save Your Life. And Fulford concludes, abandoning the concept of racism might, in fact, save America. Well, you know, here's hoping. Okay. Chinggis is another transliteration, usually in Turkic languages like Kyrgyz. James Fountain writes, it's worth noting that the Kaaba stone, that's in Mecca, is closed for the first time in the nearly 1400-year history of Islam. I wouldn't have expected that, actually, because, okay, so what has happened here? What has happened? We got a problem? Is there a problem with the stream? Because apparently people are not allowed to comment. Okay, let's see. I'll type this out. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. So normal service will be resumed shortly. Okay, so I'm going to update this. Things fall apart. Okay, well, it appears to be working. It's just that people are not allowed to comment for some reason. Okay, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to shut this down and restart and see whether that makes any difference.